faithfully delivering value, interpreting great books from around the world. Hello, this is Sally's Book Talk. Today, the book we're interpreting for you is How the Wall Street Journal Tells Stories. The Wall Street Journal is the largest paid circulation newspaper in the US. Since its founding, it has maintained a high-end positioning, with an average household income of its readers being $150,000. Its content quality is top-notch, especially highly praised in features and in-depth reporting. As of 2007, the Wall Street Journal has won a total of 33 Pulitzer Prizes, making it arguably the newspaper with the highest writing quality in the US. The author of this book, William Blundell, is a senior front page writer for the Wall Street Journal. This book is the culmination of his many years of writing experience and was previously used as internal training material for Wall Street Journal reporters. After publication, this book became a must-read for many journalism school students. However, the readership of this book is not limited to journalism school students. In the preface, Blundell clearly states that this is a book that teaches how to write stories in an interesting way. So here, stories refer not to fictional stories like novels or movie scripts, but to real stories, including news. Therefore, whether you are a journalist or editor for TV, newspapers, or public accounts, an entrepreneur needing to persuade investors, or a director or screenwriter looking for material, as long as you also want to tell a good story, then you should read this book. In Blundell's view, writing a good story has a complete process, and every step in the process is inseparable. In this book, he summarizes his years of writing experience, providing detailed strategies and writing guidance from finding material to polishing and revising the story, restoring the birth process of a good story. I've summarized this process into 4 steps. First, how to find a good story. Second, how to uncover elements that make a story engaging. Third, after the previous conceptualization, how to complete the first draft. Fourth, revision and advancement, how to make the words grab attention. First, let's look at the first question, how to find a good story. A good story isn't a fruit that falls from a tree where you just walk over and pick it up. It requires the writer to actively seek out and pay attention to various sources of information. The book mainly introduces 2 channels for obtaining information. The first channel is to engage in extensive reading. Broadly speaking, merely reading articles from popular mass media isn't enough. Stories in these outlets are often already mature and widely circulated, making it hard to produce fresher, more in-depth content. So you must forge new paths, focusing on broadly relevant yet underreported topics. Then immerse yourself in related materials, professional journals, academic publications, government releases, and more. Though content from these channels might seem dry or tedious, they contain cutting-edge developments and original ideas that often outpace mainstream media. Your efforts will yield rich insights and uncover fresh story angles. For instance, during July and August in China, the Gaokao becomes a hot topic. Beyond Gaokao discussions, you might examine policies in education journals. Report and observe recent policy shifts that mass media might have overlooked, especially those with significant impact. For example, alongside Gaokao students, vocational high school attendees form a substantial group. But since 2014, Beijing's vocational schools restricted non-local students. Could those who failed high school entrance exams and can't attend vocational schools due to residency rules hold untold stories? That's prime story material and an excellent entry point. The second channel is conversing with knowledgeable intermediaries, a likely path to cutting-edge information. These intermediaries are well-connected individuals between top authorities and frontline staff who offer detailed insights, understand policies deeply, and enjoy conversations. Keep chats relaxed. Don't force information along preconceived lines. Instead, play the ignorant reader, ask questions, and let curiosity draw unique perspectives. When needed, offer compliments or share drinks. Do whatever it takes to encourage candid sharing. Say an internet giant's leadership shakes up. A VP given major authority and high hopes suddenly resigns, but the official statement vaguely cites family reasons. Such a bland explanation surely isn't the full story. So, where can you learn what officials definitely won't tell you? The best channel is to approach mid-level managers who recently left or are about to leave the company. On one hand, they directly access top-level operations and clearly understand conflicts among executives. On the other hand, since they're departing, they're often willing to sit down for drinks and talk openly. Um, Now you know where to find story material. However, fresh material isn't always available. Sometimes we can mine untold stories from existing reports. So, how do we uncover good stories from published pieces? Three methods. First, zoom in and make the story concrete. Some events aren't expandable, but contain novel worthy elements, intense conflicts, dramatic plots, mystery. This requires writers to write with their feet, visiting scenes and engaging sources, not just compiling data like reports. For example, an article on US pension shortfalls might superficially state a 40% year over year decrease. But for deeper impact, ground macro policy effects in individual lives. Describe low income seniors unable to afford food or rent, capturing their despair. Then reveal the root cause pension cuts. Such reporting resembles miniature carving, focusing on small details to shock readers. Second method, skip developmental details. Report current outcomes and predict trends. Ideal for mature stories. What does this mean? Simply put, when causes have been extensively covered, we consider the story mature. Focus directly on consequences and affected subjects. What's their current situation? For instance, during America's mineral and energy boom, while most covered new oil fields, the Wall Street Journal examined impacts on resource-rich small towns. They discovered that these small towns' economic development was indeed boosted by surrounding mining and factories, becoming more prosperous. But simultaneously, this prosperity brought problems and pressures in other areas like environment and public safety. Third, change the storytelling perspective. This method is particularly suitable for handling macro level phenomena with wide ranging impacts and multiple factors. For example, around 1980, America already had many reports on illegal immigration, but most stories focused on border areas. Written by U.S. journalists using secondhand materials, the Wall Street Journal reporter innovatively anchored the story in a poor Mexican village, organizing it from the locals' perspective. He wrote, "A Mexican illegal immigrant earns more moving vegetables in the U.S. for 6 months than years of milking cows back home. In the village, if the man worked in California, his children could drink milk and buy 2 new outfits yearly." This perspective shifted from pure criticism to explaining the rationale behind Mexican illegal immigration. It made the article stand out, surpassing previous works in depth and vividness. After finding a good story, let's address the second issue: how to process materials and structure the article. Facing massive collected materials, writers often struggle with undefined story boundaries, either thinking too narrowly or trying to cover everything. At this point, try this approach. Summarize the main conflict through cause-effect relationships, identify influencing and reacting factors, and create a mind map. Then clearly define the story's scope. For example, consider a nationwide doctor shortage. Through material collection, you've gained basic understanding. Now, apply causal analysis, examine both causes and effects of the shortage, and map them out. For instance, the cause: high time costs during education reduces medical student enrollment. The effect: reduced healthcare quality. Rising malpractice rates and complaints lead doctors to perform unnecessary procedures to avoid liability. Increasing pressure on medical insurance funds. You might draw several similar cause-effect chains and then pick the ones most relevant to the topic. That's the scope of your reporting. After defining the story scope, the next step is to process your materials. For the first pass in processing materials, skim read everything to identify all viewpoints the materials support, big or small, and jot them down. They'll likely form the story's main arguments and subpoints. The second pass is intensive reading. For materials gathered from various sources, an effective approach is categorization. In the book, the author provides 6 classification standards: history, scope, cause, impact, counteraction, future, and lists 6 sets of questions for each. I've compiled this series of questions in a concise notes section for your writing reference. Following the 6-question classification, intensively read your materials while marking useful content and sorting it into these 6 categories. This step makes revising the manuscript much easier, because you might need to revise or rewrite drafts repeatedly, and organizing information this way helps you find relevant materials easily, avoiding the pitfall of forgetting used resources, like a bear picking corn. After handling the materials, it's time to start planning the story structure. In the book, the author proposes a fascinating and useful principle called the radical reader engagement rule. Radical readers refer to the most critical and demanding readers. As readers, what expectations do they have for the story? According to this principle, organizing the article structure can be broken down into 3 steps. First step, give these critical readers a reason to read the story. Essentially, tease and lure them in with the most captivating content. That's the opening part. Second step, after hooking readers with the opening, avoid long introductions, vague concepts, and theories. What authors often deem important can come off as tedious to readers. Dive quickly into the story and tell these critical readers exactly what happened. Third step, while telling the story, these critical readers will constantly challenge your article, questioning whether these events are true. To win their patience and convince them, you need to tell the story while giving ample evidence to make the logic complete and tight. Processing materials and organizing structure are essential steps for drafting. However, to make the story exciting and engaging, you need to answer the third question: how to make your story interesting. Many people know that strong, dramatic conflict can make a story heart-stirring. In fact, besides dramatic conflict, using these elements well can still produce very exciting stories. So the first element is time. If you can grasp history and the future, not just stick to stories of the here and now, you expand the story's depth and richness, essentially building a time tunnel for the reader. Not only can you trace the story's roots, but also anticipate its future impacts. For example, the Wall Street Journal reported a story about a contemporary climber, Finis Michel, who was quite unconventional. His life had almost no other leisure activities. For decades, whenever he had weekends or holidays, he'd pack his bags and go mountain climbing. A single climbing trip could last up to 17 days. Even in his 70s and 80s, with various injuries and illnesses, he still refused to rest at home. To maintain his physical condition for climbing, he completely gave up smoking, alcohol, and gourmet food. But if the article only focused on Finis's greatness, it would become an ordinary inspirational piece. The author of this article added another part, deepening the theme. In the article, he recalled Finis's childhood experience of climbing a mountain for the first time and being deeply fascinated, explaining to readers why he was so passionate. It also reviewed the history of hunters and explorers being obsessed with mountain climbing since the 19th century. This way, the story's perspective broadened. Many readers could also understand that Finnis wasn't a weird person, but part of a historical lineage passed down through generations of climbers. The second element is variation, fully showcasing all facets of the story, not describing it from a single angle. Specifically, it means providing different types of information sources. This not only refers to seeking sources from both sides of the event, but also means fully considering the specific roles of these sources in the event and their credibility. Um, for instance, information from involved parties is often the most comprehensive, but considering their stance, it should be verified against content from opposing sides. Observers of the event are usually more objective than involved parties, but their observations might also have errors. These different sources of information intertwine and clash in the article, filling the story with tension. The book cites an insurance fraud case as an example. Insurance fraud is commonplace in American news reports. For instance, riding a bicycle on a midnight highway to collide with slower moving cars. Then fraudsters use various tricks to pin blame on drivers, ultimately getting payouts from auto insurers. Such stories frequently appear in newspapers but remain superficial, often limited to police statements or courtroom reports. The Wall Street Journal reporter innovatively explored stories from multiple perspectives: victims, scammers, insurers, police, and judges, creating a compelling narrative. The writer first interviewed fraudsters to understand their tactics. He found scammers were always clever, timing accidents perfectly and providing seemingly solid evidence of losses. Only they knew the actual authenticity of this evidence. Victims appeared flustered, feeling innocent yet unwilling to make trouble. Even knowing they'd been scammed, they'd rush to hand matters to insurers. Insurers, as actual payers, resisted compensating fraudsters but faced extreme difficulty proving fraud. Torts consistently sympathized with seemingly injured parties while being harsh toward insurers. Thus, insurers often had to accept losses and pay claims. Content from these diverse sources presented rich conflicts, making the story intensely dramatic. The third element is dynamism. This is the most crucial point. Specifically, it means finding opposing elements in the story and making them alternate, creating dynamic confrontation. One method is constantly shifting reader attention between abstract or concrete and macro or micro information. For example, a Wall Street Journal feature on loggers noted, "It's the world's most dangerous profession, fostering unique team culture among workers." What characterizes this team culture? The author presented three abstract observations: gender discrimination, racial discrimination, and hazing of newcomers. How to clarify these abstract judgments. The author then described concrete scenarios like humiliations rookies might endure when joining the team. For example, if he had big ears, he'd forever be called Dumbo. If he just got married, they'd slip pornographic pictures into his empty lunchbox, deliberately letting the bride find them, and so on. Finally, the author quotes a veteran worker's blunt words: "Weak boys don't last. Discrimination and humiliation are abstract concepts, but using concrete information, cases, and dialogue makes them vivid, keeping readers engaged." The author first adopts a distant observational perspective, introducing loggers as a special group with three abstract characteristics, then zooms in to observe their daily lives, grounding abstract concepts in specific details. This shift in narrative rhythm helps create story dynamism. The second method is structuring the narrative around one or several contrasts. A classic 1972 Wall Street Journal report on Disney fully utilized this approach. That year, nothing major happened at Disney, yet writing an annual in-depth Disney feature had become tradition. The newspaper editor insisted the story be written. This gave the reporter a major headache. First, coverage was limited to Disney-related events from 1972. Worse, the story inherently lacked dynamism. How is this resolved? The reporter astutely noted Disney's unique trait. 16 years after Walt Disney's death, the company still adhered to his values, unlike other companies that evolve under new management. So the reporter built two contrasting pairs, unchanging Disney versus evolving culture, and Disney executives believing they provided wholesome entertainment versus cultural critics viewing Disney as a cultural disaster. Using these contrasts, he interviewed sources and gathered material, adding dramatic tension to the story. Now, to the final question, how to make every word grab attention, keeping reports engaging and preventing reader boredom. I've distilled three core principles from this book. First, be precise and concrete in description rather than using abstract nouns. For example, you might frequently use abstract terms like problem, response, or benefit. At such times, immediately pause and ask if you can replace them with more specific, vivid words. Consider what exactly you're trying to convey. Is it fear, hatred, or suspicion? Remember, choose the most precise words, especially verbs, as a strong verb enhances a story's vitality and depth. In this sentence, readers not only sense the mayor's temper, but recognize his complete self-unawareness. Second, constantly ask yourself, is this how I'd speak to friends? This question demands natural, simple writing, where direct descriptions echo the theme and propel the story forward. Elegant phrasing can become cumbersome. You must periodically stop and question, what's the purpose of this description? Like chatting with friends, writing should draw readers into the story. Remember, you're a storyteller, not a lecturer. Third, maintain coherence by letting the story flow naturally. Avoid transition sentences or paragraphs. With pre-organized materials and a clear outline, you'll complete the story smoothly without agonizing over transitions. If transitions are unavoidable, use vivid details to lure readers into subsequent content. In short, avoid long-winded sentences offering little new information. When abstraction is necessary, be concise. All right, you now know how to craft a compelling story. Don't forget to revise your draft. If exhausted, set it aside for days before revisiting. When reviewing, focus on three aspects. First point, clarity, whether additional content would enhance clarity. Second point, conclusion and flow, whether your conclusion conveys your intended message and whether transitions feel natural. Third, can the story's rhythm and details be optimized? You can trim word by word, removing as much excess content as possible to make the story's rhythm lighter. Finally, author Blundell reminds us that although he has summarized, some previously unexpressed strategies, intuitions, and feelings in this book, in actual writing, don't mechanically apply these strategies and techniques. Instead, use them flexibly and retain your own style. So when you write, you should also listen to your inner voice and choose the way that feels most comfortable and natural to you. You can consider readers' preferences, but never fear that your style might offend them. Don't change your expression to cater to an entire room of people, because once you develop this habit of catering, it will stifle your personal style and make it hard to write truly impressive stories. Well, that's the interpretation of how the Wall Street Journal tells stories for you. The listening notes are below the audio. See you tomorrow.